Iran is a nation in mourning, bidding a long goodbye to the former president, Ayatollah Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, whose influence spanned and shaped 4 decades of Iranian politics, looming large in death as he did in life.
از پایه اساسی کشور تو تصمیمات سیاسی آقای هاشمی بوده.
تدبیر و درایت و فکر حضرت آیت الله هاشمی همیشه پشتوانه انقلاب و مردم بوده است.
فقدان ایشون برای مردم کشورمون خیلی سخت هستش و فکرم نمی‌کنم جایگزینی برای ایشون پیدا بشه.
And in the anguish, there is also anxiety. His passing has opened up questions about the political divisions which mark Iranian society. Rafsanjani was viewed as a crucial public supporter of the moderate voice. And his death now leaves that role open. Just months before his protege, President Hassan Rouhani, seeks re-election. Rafsanjani is considered one of the founding fathers of the Islamic Republic of Iran. He was a confidant of the first supreme leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khamenei, and was believed to have played an influential role in installing the second supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Rafsanjani was also regarded by some to be a pragmatic politician, carving his own role into modern Iranian history. He became the nation's first president after the Iran-Iraq War. And in recent years, he headed up the Expediency Council, the political body which settles disputes between Parliament and the Guardian Council, walking the path between moderate and hardline factions. He advocated for rapprochement with the West and developing Iran's economic relationship with the outside world, and was also a vocal supporter of the 2015 Iran deal signed by Rouhani's government. Even though the majority of Iranians were born after the revolution, Rafsanjani held a political capital which was able to bridge the generation gap. So who can fill that void now that one of the Republic's pillars has passed on? Natalie Perhanan, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Tehran is Ghanbar Naderi. He's a political analyst and journalist with the Kayhan International newspaper. And here in studio with me is Borzo Daragahi, Middle East correspondent for BuzzFeed News. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Borzo, when you read about Iran from the outside, you read about someone like Rafsanjani, you hear moderate, reformist. But in many ways, those sorts of words are used so often that they seem meaningless sometimes. Was he truly a reformist? Was he truly a moderate? And if so, why?
Well, he was a politician. First and foremost, and I would say that he was a pragmatist in that he, like most politicians, was sort of an opportunist. And throughout the world, politicians are opportunists, and he evolved with the times. He was a staunch conservative in the sort of traditional conservative faction in Iran when it suited his political interests. And then when that didn't suit his political interests, he sort of evolved. He rebranded himself to a certain extent as a champion of the moderates, even to some extent a champion of the reformists. And that's how he went out at the end of his life, even if he was not necessarily himself ideologically committed to any of the positions. And we don't know what his real feelings were, what his real ideology was. He found a way for himself to have a political life and to pursue his own interests and pursue his political interests in a way that he thought best suited the survival of the Islamic Republic.
Ghanbar Naderi, is that accurate? Is that fair that we don't know for sure what his true positions were?
Well, until 10 years ago, you might say we had some ideas about his, political affiliations, where he wanted to go, where he wanted to be heading to, especially with regards to his followers. But the biggest problem with Mr. Rafsanjani, indeed with other political figures, even our artists, our anti-Iran establishment, anti-establishment, anti-Iran currents outside the country, is that the biggest challenge for all of them is that they have failed to contemporize. if they cannot contemporize, if they cannot modernize their views, their aspirations, they have no place within the Iranian society. Just as we can say it with 100% confidence that the current government doesn't have any place among the younger generation of this country, because we have a cabinet of grannies that belongs to the 20th century, and they have no idea what does it mean to live in the 21st century. So my own argument is that Mr. Rafsanjani, just like many other politicians in Iran, failed to connect with the modern world, with the modern generation of Iranians.
But you say he failed to connect, but then there were those, particularly in 2009, who saw him as one of them. He didn't wholeheartedly support, say, the Green Revolution and those protesters, but he gave a little nod of encouragement to them, right? And isn't there a bit of a clue? Isn't it quite revealing that at the funeral you had groups of mourners chanting opposition slogans, or Hussein, Mir Hussein, referring to Mousavi? It seemed as if they still rallied around him being some sort of symbol of change, right?
Well, that gathering had nothing to do with Mr. Rafsanjani or his funeral, and everything to do with some kind of, showing solidarity, showing some kind of unity among different factions of this country to the outside world, and they have somehow succeeded. But if you ask me, I have talked to many conservatives, many reformists. They just don't want to see each other. They don't want to see each other face to face, let alone give some kind of compliments to each other. So if they gathered there, the conservatives were there, if our leader was there, he even failed, he even refused to give his final blessing and his final forgiveness to Mr. Rafsanjani. What does it mean? It means that he has not forgiven Mr. Rafsanjani for playing a role in the 1998-1999 post-election unrest in the Iranian capital. So if you want to ask me, my argument is that it was only for sure. It was a facade to show to the rest of the international community that this country is still standing together. But at the end of the day, everybody went their own separate ways.
Yeah, that's really interesting because Burzu, from here, I'm consuming the media. I'm seeing 2.5 million people at the funeral. I'm seeing Ayatollah Ali Khamenei leading the funeral. You'd think that he had the wholehearted support of the establishment and the leadership. What Ghanbar is saying is not so fast. Do you agree with that? I mean,
Rafsanjani himself, he did not have the wholehearted support of the establishment. Many people inside the establishment, many conservatives, really, they really hate him. They really despised him. For example, the former president, Ahmadinejad, considered him and publicly called him a crook and a criminal. For example, the supreme leader himself, in his final condolences, demoted Rafsanjani from an Ayatollah to a Hujjatullah Islam, which is a much lower ranking clerical level. And so, yes, people came out, but even in some of the video clips you saw like extreme rifts between people in the factions in the society. For example, you saw a video clip of Rafsanjani's son holding back the head of the state television, who wanted to be one of the pallbearers to carry Rafsanjani's coffin. And Rafsanjani's son was literally physically holding him back, preventing him from getting near him because of the animosity between the two factions, between because of the fight between the two different groups in the society, the moderate reformists on the one hand and the conservative hardliners on the other.
So, Ghanbar, with the death of this man who was in many ways sort of in between the two polarities here, has this tilted the momentum in favor of the hardliners, in favor of the conservative hardliners who really loathed him?
Absolutely, you are spot on. The biggest loser of the death of Mr. Rafsanjani has to be President Rouhani. As you just mentioned earlier in your program, Mr. Rafsanjani had been a kingmaker of this country. He endorsed and he helped Imam Khamenei to become the first supreme leader of this country. Then he endorsed the leadership of our current leader, who is Ayatollah Khamenei, and Mr. Rouhani, for the past 3.5 years, has refused to act and behave like a president. He is representing himself as the next supreme leader of this country. and he needed all the support and endorsement of Mr. Rafsanjani to make his dreams come true. The problem now is that Mr. Rafsanjani is no longer among us, and it means that President Rouhani has lost one of his biggest supporters to become the next leader of this country. So make no mistakes, the biggest winners of this, this sad occasion of the passing of Mr. Rafsanjani has to be the hardliners, and they have already begun full force going for the next presidential race, and they want to make sure that Mr. Rouhani has no chance whatsoever to win the presidential election for the next round.
Rouhani weakened? Is that the way you see it, Borzo?
Well, it's hard to say. And, I've gotten very, very careful about trying to predict things in Iran. No one predicted Khatami's rise, his meteoric rise. That was the reformist president of Iran who came to power in 1997. No one predicted the election of Ahmadinejad at all. No one expected him to defeat to defeat Hashemi Rafsanjani in 2005. No one expected millions of people, young people, old people from different classes, to pour into the streets of Tehran and other cities in 2009 and protest against the allegedly fraudulent elections of that year. And no one expected Rouhani to beat out a sea of conservative candidates to win in the first round of 2013. So I think it's a fool's game predicting stuff about Iran, predicting politics in Iran. I'll refrain from doing that, but I would say it could go either way, because in many ways, Rafsanjani, because of the reputation he had as corrupt, as sort of this wily, opportunistic politician, he may have in some ways hurt and constrained Rouhani, and now Rouhani can himself take on the mantle of being the leader of the moderates and the reformists, if he's wily enough to do that, and he seems like enough of a tough insider to be able to do that, and launch a whole new generation of moderate reform in Iran.
Ghanbar, to pick up on something Borzo said, he mentioned the corrupt reputation. Rafsanjani was a very wealthy man from pistachio farming and exports. Was he a corrupt man?
Well, let's not talk about Mr. Rafsanjani. He's a gone man. He's a goner.
No, but I mean, just very simply, is that justified when people call him corrupt?
One point.
Sure.
Yes,
if you could answer that.
He was a corrupt politician. Yes, he was a corrupt politician, and he took advantage of his position on several occasions to make himself and his families and those around him as rich as possible. And there is no doubt about it. There is no argument about it. Your distinguished guest is right, absolutely right. But there is one problem here. I think he was right to some extent to say that it is difficult to predict the politics in this country, but that belongs to the past, when Iran was selling oil at $140 a barrel. With oil prices down the drain now, nobody wants to take any unnecessary chances. There is no more any room for error in this country. That's why it's easier than ever to predict what will happen next time when we have the next presidential race, and of course, when we have to choose our next leader. So I can tell you with 100% confidence that the moderates, the so-called moderates and the reformists are not going to have any say in these two important, occasions in our history.
Okay, you're much more confident about the future. Borzo is not. Borzo, one final question for you. You cover the region a lot, particularly in terms of how Iran projects itself in foreign policy in the region. Its staunch ally is Russia. At the funeral, you had protesters saying death to Russia. Tell me what's behind that.
Well, I think there's a couple things going on. I think that they're to some extent mocking those hardliners who say death to America at every occasion, sort of noting the utter dependence, security-wise, of the Iranian establishment, the Iranian regime, on this sort of Russia overall security blanket. And that really hurts the pride of Iranians who pride themselves on their independence. But I also think that there might be some just concern about there is some latent concern, and you see reports of it, about the Iranian role in Syria and the sort of collaboration with Russia in taking part in that civil war and the cost of that.
Okay, that's fascinating. Gentlemen, we could go on forever. This is fantastic. Really enjoyed it. Khan Barnaderi and Burzu Daragahi. Unfortunately, I've got to wrap. Thanks so much for joining us.